Hello and welcome. Today, we delve into a case that shocked the entire country of Australia, one that sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Sydney. In 2009, the Lin family was brutally murdered in what would later be known as the Lin Family Massacre, one of the most chilling and senseless crimes in New South Wales history. It was a crime so horrific that it left the entire nation asking the same question: how could something like this happen to an ordinary family? What dark secrets were hidden behind this massacre, and who could have been cold enough to commit such an unthinkable act? As we journey back in time, we will uncover the chilling events that led to the massacre. The Lin family, once thriving and full of love, was destroyed in a single night, leaving behind questions and unanswered mysteries that would haunt the community forever. Tonight, we'll explore the gruesome details of the crime, the investigation that followed, and the terrifying truths that slowly came to light. Who were the people behind this unimaginable violence, and what were their motives? How could a family that seemed so close, so ordinary, become the target of such brutality? Join me as we retrace the events, uncover hidden truths, and explore the dark secrets that led to this shocking tragedy. Stay with me as we begin to unravel the story of the Lin Family Massacre. The Lin family had built a life of comfort and warmth in Australia after migrating from China. Lin Ming, the head of the family, was a man known for his hard work and dedication. He had successfully established his own business, providing well for his wife, Lam Thursday Van, and their three children: Lin Han, the eldest son, Lin Tao, his younger brother, and Lin Tuan, the youngest and only daughter. The family lived in a charming home in the northwest of Sydney, where they were regarded as kind and hard-working people by their community. Their home was filled with love and laughter, and every Friday evening was reserved for a family dinner, a simple yet deeply cherished tradition. On October 19, 2009, the Lin family gathered for their usual Friday evening dinner, unaware that this would be the last time they would sit together in the comfort of their home. The atmosphere was warm and familiar. Lin Ming, as was often the case, was looking ahead to the busy days to come, so he decided to leave a little earlier than usual. He took his two sons, Lin Han and Lin Tao, with him, leaving behind Lam Thursday Van and Lin Tuan, who stayed behind to finish tidying up. There was nothing unusual about this. It was a normal Friday evening, and they thought nothing of it. However, as the night wore on, something sinister was lurking in the shadows. Lin Ming and his sons drove off, unaware that the tranquility of their home was about to be shattered. What began as a regular family gathering was soon to spiral into a nightmare that no one could have predicted. The family would soon find their lives irrevocably changed, their sense of security ripped apart in a brutal and heartless act. The hours passed, and the Lin family had no idea that a deadly storm was about to descend on them. Little did they know, someone they had trusted was drawing closer, prepared to tear everything apart. The peacefulness of their home, their love and laughter, would soon be replaced by unimaginable horror. What followed that night would haunt them forever, and the family would never again be the same. Saturday morning arrived, and the sun rose over Sydney's northwest. The Lin family's newsstand, which was usually bustling with activity by 9 a.m., remained eerily silent. This was strange. Lin Ming, the patriarch of the family, was known for his punctuality and commitment. It was unlike him to miss a day of work, and yet, there were no signs of the family at their usual post. A growing sense of unease settled over the community, and people began to wonder if something had gone wrong. Lam Thursday Van, Lin Ming's wife, grew increasingly concerned. After several attempts to reach her husband and children without success, she decided to visit the family home. It was a decision that would lead her down a path no one should ever have to walk. As Lam Thursday Van approached the house, everything seemed eerily calm. The front door was unlocked, nothing out of the ordinary, she thought. But what lay inside would shake her to her very core. She stepped into the house, only to be met by a sight so horrifying, so unimaginable, that it felt as if her world had come to an end. Blood. Everywhere. The living room was soaked in crimson, as though a storm of violence had swept through it. The walls, once pristine, were now marked with dark, smeared stains. Lam Thursday Van's heart raced as she stumbled further into the house, each step taking her deeper into the nightmare. And then, her eyes fell upon her sister-in-law, Lin Shu. She was lying motionless on the floor, her body surrounded by an overwhelming pool of blood. Frozen in place, Lam Thursday Van could barely comprehend the scene unfolding before her. But the horror did not end there. A blood trail led up the stairs, beckoning her to follow it into the unknown. She took hesitant steps, dread crawling up her spine. Upstairs, the nightmare continued. In one of the bedrooms, she found the bodies of Lin Han and Lin Tao, her nephews lifeless, their young faces unrecognizable. The devastation was complete. But the most chilling discovery awaited her in the next room. There, in a pool of blood, was Lin Ming, her beloved husband, his body battered beyond recognition. Lam Thursday Van screamed, her voice echoing through the empty house, but there was no one there to hear her. She was alone with the gruesome aftermath of a crime that would haunt her forever. The life she had built, the family she loved so dearly, was shattered in an instant. In the silence that followed, one question lingered in her mind, unanswered: who could do something so horrific to a family that had done nothing but love and care for one another? This was no ordinary crime. This was something far darker, far more calculated. And it was only the beginning of a twisted and tragic story that would unfold in the days to come. What Lin Shu walked into that day was a scene that could only be described as a nightmare come to life. The once peaceful home, filled with love and laughter, now lay in chaos. Her heart raced as she stumbled upon her sister-in-law, Lam Thursday Van, and the horrifying sight of her family lying lifeless, blood soaking into the walls and floors. But it wasn't just the sight of the bodies that chilled her to the bone, it was the brutality, the sheer coldness of it all. This was no random act of violence. The police were called, and what they discovered upon their arrival only deepened the mystery. The crime scene was far worse than anyone could have imagined. The house, which had once been a place of warmth, was now the site of a brutal and methodical killing spree. The second-floor bedrooms revealed more horrors. The bodies of the victims, Lin Ming, his wife Lam Thursday Van, and their two young sons, Lin Han and Lin Tao, were not just killed, they had been obliterated in a violent attack that seemed personal, calculated, and chillingly efficient. The four victims appeared to have been asleep when the killers struck. There was no sign of a struggle, no desperate attempt to escape. It was as if the killer knew exactly how to approach each victim, targeting their most vulnerable moments while they slept peacefully in their beds. The injuries they sustained were severe. Their heads and faces were so badly damaged that identification was initially impossible without forensic evidence. This was not just an act of violence, it was a message, a chillingly deliberate act of brutality designed to instill fear and confusion. And then came the most perplexing aspect of the crime scene: there were no signs of forced entry. The doors and windows were all intact. Nothing had been stolen or disturbed, suggesting that the killer had intimate knowledge of the house. The door had not been kicked in, the windows were not broken, nothing about this seemed like a break-in. Instead, the killer appeared to have entered and exited the house with ease, as though they had a key, as though they were welcome in the home. The meticulous nature of the attack led investigators to consider the possibility that the killer was not a stranger. This wasn't a random act of violence, but something far more sinister, a premeditated crime, executed with disturbing precision. The absence of a struggle, the familiarity with the home's layout, and the brutal nature of the killings all pointed to someone who knew the family well. Someone who understood the family's routine and was able to strike without raising suspicion. As the investigation unfolded, the questions only grew. Who was capable of such a gruesome act? And why? The police were left with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain: the killer was still out there, and the Lin family's tragedy was far from over. The Lin Family Massacre left the authorities with more questions than answers. As the police launched their investigation, it became painfully clear that this was no random act of violence. The scene was far too calculated, too methodical, for it to be the result of an unplanned attack. The most striking detail? No valuables had been stolen. The family's possessions, jewelry, cash, personal belongings were all left untouched. This was not a robbery gone wrong, this was something far more sinister. The doors and windows were all locked from the inside, a troubling sign that suggested the killer either had a key to the house or was incredibly familiar with the family's routine. Forensic experts quickly descended on the scene, hoping to uncover any trace of evidence that could lead them to the killer. And what they found only deepened the mystery. Bloody handprints stained the walls, a chilling reminder of the violence that had taken place. A blood trail snaked its way up the stairs, leading to the second floor, where the bodies of the Lin family members were discovered. Yet, there was no obvious sign of a struggle. No broken windows, no forced entry, and no indication that the family had been aware of their impending fate. It was as though the killer had been able to enter the home unnoticed, strike without warning, and leave without a trace. The absence of a clear motive further complicated the investigation. At first, the police speculated that the killings might have been the result of a personal vendetta. Perhaps there was a long-standing family dispute that had boiled over into violence. But as they sifted through the evidence, they found no signs of any animosity or underlying tensions between the Lin family members. There were no reports of conflict, no disagreements with neighbors, and no suspicious activity leading up to the crime. This raised an even more troubling question: who would want to commit such a heinous act against a family that was known for their kindness, respectability, and hard work? The Lin family had built a life in Australia based on honesty and integrity. They were well liked, well respected in their community, and lived what seemed to be a quiet, peaceful existence. To think that someone would target them so ruthlessly seemed impossible to comprehend. As the investigation unfolded, the police grew increasingly desperate for answers. The case had taken a dark turn, and every lead seemed to raise more questions than it answered. The killer's motives remained a mystery, and with no obvious suspects, the investigation was left to spiral deeper into uncertainty. What would drive a person to destroy an entire family in such a violent, calculated manner? The answers were buried somewhere in the shadows, and the police were determined to uncover the truth. The chilling reality of the Lin Family Massacre had settled into the minds of the investigators. With each passing hour, they knew the case was slipping away from them. Yet, they couldn't let go. They would keep pushing forward, piecing together the puzzle, determined to bring the perpetrator to justice. Little did they know, the investigation was only just beginning, and the most shocking revelations were yet to come. As the investigation deepened, a name began to emerge: Talianbin, Lin Ming's brother-in-law. On the surface, he seemed like any other member of the extended family, but the more the police delved into his background, the more his connection to the crime became impossible to ignore. Talianbin had spent much of his life struggling to establish himself. Once a promising doctor back in China, he had come to Australia full of ambition, but over the years, his life had taken a darker turn. His medical qualifications were not recognized in Australia, and his attempts to build a career in the medical field had faltered. Frustration soon turned to failure. Talianbin found himself unable to find stable work, eventually turning to business ventures that also collapsed. His financial troubles mounted, leaving him buried under a growing mountain of debt. The once respected professional had now become a man trapped by his own failures, unable to escape the shadows of his past. And as time passed, his envy of his brother-in-law, Lin Ming, grew. Lin Ming had it all: success, a thriving business, a happy family, and the respect of the community. Meanwhile, Talianbin watched from the sidelines, feeling more and more resentful of his brother-in-law's success. This bitterness simmered beneath the surface for years, unnoticed by those around him. But as the investigation unfolded, the police began to see a pattern in Talianbin's behavior that made him a prime suspect. His jealousy of Lin Ming's accomplishments wasn't just a passing emotion, it had become a driving force in his life. He saw Lin Ming's success as a reflection of his own failures, and the resentment he had been harboring for so long seemed to have reached a breaking point. The police uncovered details about Talianbin's life that painted a picture of a man consumed by jealousy and frustration. He had lived in the shadow of his brother-in-law for far too long, and as his own life unraveled, it seemed that his resentment had only grown stronger. His failure to establish himself in Australia, coupled with the constant comparison to Lin Ming's success, had caused a slow but steady deterioration of his mental state. Was it possible that these feelings of inadequacy and jealousy had finally pushed him to commit the unthinkable? The evidence began to stack up. Talianbin's intimate connection to the Lin family made him a key figure in the case. He had access to the house, knew the family's routine, and was well acquainted with their habits. The police began to wonder if his long-standing resentment and bitterness had built up to the point where he saw murder as the only way to take control of his situation. Could it be that in a moment of rage, driven by jealousy and years of frustration, Talianbin had decided to end the Lin family's happiness forever? As the investigation continued, the question on everyone's mind grew louder: was Talianbin the man behind the massacre? Or was there someone else lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike next? The more the police learned about Talianbin's life, the clearer it became that his jealousy and frustration had made him a prime suspect in one of the most brutal crimes Australia had ever seen. The chilling possibility that a family member, someone so close to the Lin family, could be responsible for such a heinous act left the community in shock. A family that had once been united in love and respect now found itself torn apart by betrayal and murder. And the police knew that in order to solve this case, they would need to dig even deeper into Talianbin's life and uncover the dark secrets he had been hiding for so long. As the investigation into the Lin Family Massacre continued, evidence against Talianbin began to stack up. At first, the clues were circumstantial, but soon, the forensic team uncovered a breakthrough that would change everything. While combing through the crime scene, investigators found footprints leading away from the house, hidden in the dark corners of the property. The prints seemed small but distinct, and when the forensic team matched them to a pair of shoes Talianbin had been seen wearing in the days leading up to the murder, the connection was undeniable. The shoes were a match. Talianbin had been at the scene of the crime. This discovery set off a chain of events that brought the investigation one step closer to the truth. But that was just the beginning. As forensic experts continued to analyze the evidence, another startling discovery was made. A bloodstain, found on a piece of clothing that Talianbin had worn in the days following the massacre, linked him directly to the horrific scene. This stain wasn't just any trace of blood, it was proof that he had been in close proximity to the victims, perhaps even as they took their last breaths. The blood matched the DNA of the Lin family, further cementing Talianbin's involvement in the crime. The detectives now had undeniable physical evidence that linked him to the brutal murders. The breakthrough in physical evidence was crucial, but it wasn't the only thing that pointed to Talianbin. As the police delved deeper into his past, they uncovered troubling details about his behavior in the days before the murder. Witnesses began to come forward, describing how Talianbin had been acting increasingly nervous and erratic. He had become agitated, unable to sit still, constantly shifting his gaze, and avoiding eye contact. Those who had known him for years began to notice a change. Something in his demeanor had shifted, and it was as if a dark shadow had begun to take over him. One witness recalled a conversation with Talianbin just days before the murder. He had seemed anxious, almost jittery, talking about family matters in an unusual way. His voice had quivered with unease, and he repeatedly asked about the Lin family's plans for the weekend, as if trying to gather information without drawing attention to himself. His increasing nervousness only seemed to confirm the police's suspicions. Talianbin knew something was coming, and he was trying to cover his tracks. As more information came to light, it became increasingly clear that the man who had once been so close to the Lin family, someone they had trusted, had turned into their worst nightmare. The man who had once shared meals with them, laughed with them, and been a part of their lives was now the one responsible for their deaths. The police were closing in on him, but the most chilling realization was yet to come. Talianbin had carried out this brutal act not in a fit of rage, but as the culmination of years of resentment, jealousy, and unaddressed anger. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. With the physical evidence, the testimonies from witnesses, and the forensic findings, it seemed impossible that Talianbin could escape justice. The investigation had taken twists and turns, but with this final breakthrough, it was clear that the killer was someone no one had expected, the family member who had been closest to them all along. As the police prepared to move in and make their arrest, they knew that this would be a case that would haunt the community for years to come. And for the Lin family, the nightmare was only just beginning to unravel. The trial of Talianbin was a drawn-out and painful process that stretched over several months, and for many, it felt like an eternity. The courtroom was filled with anticipation and a sense of unease as the family and community waited for justice to be served. Talianbin, once a trusted member of the Lin family, sat in the dock, his demeanor cold and distant, as the overwhelming evidence against him mounted. Despite this, he continued to deny any involvement in the murders. He maintained his innocence, claiming that he had been at home during the time of the killings, offering up an alibi that quickly unraveled under the intense scrutiny of the prosecution. As the defense presented their case, they attempted to argue that Talianbin was being framed, that there had been some mistake. But the weight of the evidence was too powerful to ignore. The forensic evidence, the bloody footprints, the bloodstains found on his clothing, the eyewitness testimonies, all of it pointed directly to him. There was no escaping the truth. The defense's claims of innocence were hollow in the face of the undeniable facts. The prosecution's case was built on the dark motivations that had driven Talianbin to commit such a horrific crime. His jealousy of Lin Ming's success had festered over the years. His feelings of inadequacy and frustration, coupled with a growing resentment toward the Lin family, had spiraled out of control. Talianbin wanted more than just the life of his brother-in-law's family. He wanted power, control, and the wealth that came with it. He saw Lin Ming's prosperous business and Lin Tuan's inheritance as his key to a new life, one where he could finally live up to the image of success he had never attained. It was revealed during the trial that Talianbin had meticulously planned the murders, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He knew exactly when Lin Tuan would be away and how to gain access to the house without arousing suspicion. The murders were not random, they were calculated, deliberate acts driven by an overwhelming greed. He had taken the lives of 5 people, including the woman he called his sister-in-law and 2 innocent children, to satisfy his insatiable hunger for wealth and power. His actions, once hidden behind a mask of familial affection, were now exposed for the world to see. As the final arguments were made and the jury deliberated, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. For the family of the Lin victims, the trial had been a painful journey, reliving the brutal loss of their loved ones with each testimony and piece of evidence presented. For Lin Tuan, the only surviving member of the Lin family, the trial was an opportunity for justice to finally be served, but it also brought back the haunting memories of that tragic night. No amount of justice could ever bring back the family she had lost, but she held on to the hope that this trial would ensure that the person responsible would never walk free again. After a long and grueling process, the jury returned with their verdict. Talianbin was found guilty of 5 counts of murder. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and sorrow, as the man who had caused so much pain and suffering was finally held accountable for his actions. The motive was clear: jealousy, greed, and a twisted desire for control over the Lin family's wealth, with Lin Tuan's inheritance at the heart of it all. Talianbin had sacrificed everything: his family, his future, and his humanity for the sake of his own ambitions. The judge sentenced Talianbin to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a sentence that brought some closure to the case, but for the victims' families, it was a bittersweet victory. The tragedy of the Lin family would never be fully erased. The crime had left scars that would never heal, but at least the man responsible would never harm anyone else again. The trial had brought the truth to light, but the emotional and psychological toll of the murders would stay with those who survived for the rest of their lives. As the gavel struck and the verdict was final, it marked the end of a dark chapter in the Lin family's history. The case had captured the attention of the community and the nation, a reminder of the lengths to which jealousy and greed can drive a person. It also served as a testament to the resilience of those left behind, like Lin Tuan, who would carry on her family's legacy despite the horrors they had endured. But the trial, while bringing justice, could not undo the devastation that had already been wrought. It was a reminder that sometimes, the monsters we fear most are the ones closest to us. Thank you for joining us today as we explored one of the most tragic and shocking cases in Australia's history, the Lin Family Massacre. This heart-wrenching story reminds us how envy, greed, and unchecked ambition can lead to destruction, even within the closest of families. The Lin family's nightmare unfolded at the hands of someone they trusted, someone who had been a part of their lives for years. It's a grim reality that shows how deeply hidden resentment and jealousy can build, eventually erupting in the most unimaginable ways. As we reflect on the horror of that night, let's take away a crucial lesson: the importance of protecting our loved ones and never taking the peace and trust we share with those closest to us for granted. We live in a world where danger can sometimes come from the people we least expect. That's why we must remain vigilant and safeguard those relationships that truly matter. The Lin family's story is also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, particularly that of Lin Tuan, the surviving member of the family. Though she lost everything that night, she has shown an incredible amount of strength throughout the investigation and trial. While justice was served, the emotional toll of such an immense loss will never truly fade. We hope her journey of healing inspires others to find strength in the face of unspeakable pain. As we close this chapter, remember that justice, no matter how long it takes, will eventually prevail. While the wounds left by such a crime will never fully heal, the truth will always come to light, and those responsible will face the consequences of their actions. Thank you for being with us today. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and always cherish those you love. Until next time, take care.